It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. You know, unless you work at one, the supermarket might be like the most ordinary place in American life that you take the most for granted. You go a couple of times a week, maybe you barely think about it, and part of the comfort is not having to think about how any of it works. But if you ever worked in a grocery store, you'd know that a supermarket is really an ecosystem, and the people keeping it alive are working harder for less than many of us pushing a cart would guess. My next guest spent a year on the other side of the register and wrote a book based on notes she took after each shift. In the fall of 2020, writer Ann Larson took a job as a cashier at a grocery store in Utah. What she found is a job that's physically brutal, badly paid, and far more skilled than you probably give it credit for. With me now is Ann Larson, fellow with the Economic Hardship Reporting Project and the author now of Clean Up on Aisle 5, Essential Work, Poverty Wages, and the View from Behind the Supermarket Register. And thanks for coming on. Welcome to WNYC.
Hi, Brian. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
And listeners, we're going to invite your first-person stories here. Do you currently or have you ever worked at a supermarket? 212-433 WNYC. What would be the headline from you? What's the job actually like from behind the register, deli counter, stock room, wherever you are or wherever you work? 212-433 WNYC. Whatever you think the rest of the general public should know that they don't see as ordinary shoppers. 212-433-9692. On things that were not great working conditions or great pay, have you ever found a way to push back or make it better? Call or text us with your supermarket employment stories, 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692 for Ann Larson. Why, Ann, out of all the things you could have undertaken as a, should we call it a undercover act of journalism, why this?
Well, like a lot of people, I found myself unemployed during the pandemic. So while I eventually wrote a book about my experience on the job, and after a few months there, I realized that I needed to write about what I was experiencing and observing. At first, I just got the job because that was what was available in my community. I had been living in New York City for about 20 years. I moved there to attend the City University of New York, actually, to go to graduate school. But after a while, my professional class jobs kind of dried up and I was facing unemployment. So I moved back to my home region. I'm from the Mountain States and I moved back to Utah. And my timing was really poor because I moved back right as the pandemic was getting underway. And so my city was shutting down. People weren't hiring. I sent out a lot of resumes to white collar jobs and didn't hear much back. And so at the time, I was living near a supermarket that I started shopping in. It was a very, very large store. I would go there to shop and I would see all of these employees. And here they were. They were showing up to work every day, punching a clock. They were still smiling and offering great customer service. And while many other businesses were closed and schools were closed, here were these people here to make sure that rest of us could buy groceries. And I was super impressed by that. And I also think I felt a little bit guilty that I wasn't there with them. And so I thought, why not? I can get a job in the store. I will earn some money. I can get health insurance because I didn't have that at the time. And I'll sort of wait this pandemic out, see how long this lasts. And it ended up being about 13 months. And by the end, I definitely knew, what I had seen was so troubling and enlightening that I wanted to write a book about it.
So you didn't go in with the intent of writing a book or doing journalism necessarily about your experience, mostly just to fill that weird time during the pandemic with some employment?
Exactly, exactly.
You've said that in supermarkets there are two versions of community happening at once. What are they?
So the supermarket I describe in my book is kind of a split screen. On the one side, the supermarket is a really wonderful place. If you think about your neighborhood grocery store, it's hard to imagine living without it. It's a pillar of the community. It's almost always open. You can go in anytime and find, thousands of products on sale, day or night. My store was certainly that way. It was a community for shoppers, especially during the pandemic. People came in just to see other people, to be around community, to get their basic needs met, to chat with each other, to chat with workers. For workers, too, the supermarket could be a community. I found a lot of solidarity there, workers who helped each other, who gave each other rides home from work. There was all sorts of positive effects of being in the supermarket and of the supermarket just being open during that time. Then I think that's true for supermarkets all the time. But then on the other side of the split screen is a very dark place where workers are earning very low wages, where they aren't able. Imagine you are working in a supermarket and you are surrounded by food all the time, but you can't afford to buy it. Many of my colleagues earned so little that they couldn't afford their own grocery bill. There was a study done a few years ago that said the country's second largest grocery company, its workers, three-quarters of its workers said they had been food insecure, what people call food insecure in the past, meaning they're going hungry. So this is a huge problem where you have, on the one side, a community center, happy, smiling workers. On the other side of the split screen, people are really suffering from economic precarity. There's also a lot of injury in the supermarket. We may think of cashiering as kind of light, easy work, but what I discovered on the job is there is nothing further from the truth. Virtually everyone I worked with who had been at the job very long suffered from physical injury. Think about a cashier who's scanning groceries all day long, thousands of times over months and years. Cashiers develop carpal tunnel and other injuries that health professionals call MSDs, musculoskeletal disorders. And these are extremely common in the industry. In fact, MSDs are one of the most common injuries in the workplace. So again, the split screen, there's this community, a really positive place, a wonderful place, but on the other side, it's pretty dark.
Yeah, I saw where you wrote about Irene, a cashier working through a serious back injury who got reported as rude because she was in too much pain to smile. And I think we have an injury on the supermarket job story on the phone here. Cheryl in Port Washington, you're on WNYC. Thank you for calling in.
Good morning. So I started working as a supermarket cashier as a way to earn some money when I was a kid, and I started in my father's and grandfather's small supermarket. And, you stand all day, there's no stool. And after a while, I developed a broken blood vessel in my leg. And it is exhausting work.
Did you report the broken blood vessel, and did you get any kind of either sympathy or accommodation from the manager?
The manager was my grandfather, and I don't know that I reported it, but that was how I was able to earn some money. We're going back into the 60s and 70s. Before they made change for you on the machine, you had to do the math and count up from the amount that the groceries cost, and you had to pull the groceries towards you. There was no electronic bill.
Cheryl, thank you very much. The days even before the electronic belt. John in Manhattan, you're on WNYC. Hi, John.
Oh, hey, Brian. I'm John from Manhattan. I promise I won't curse this time. And I worked in a local market.
Oh, that John from Manhattan. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sure I'm the only one. But anyway, I worked in a local market during COVID as well for about 4 years in their online shopping department. And I worked with we'll probably have 100 employees. It's big business. Just wanted to say New York City, the pay is not bad. I live in the neighborhood and it's rent stabilized my apartment, so I could pretty much kind of afford to live and work nearby for one. So maybe it's different out in the country, outside of New York where it's $7 an hour, which is probably virtually impossible to live. But it's really hard work. Everyone there was an immigrant, either from West Africa or from south of the border. I don't know any of their statuses, but the owners were kind. I'm sure they all got paid well. but it's really hard, especially out of sight of the customers physically. A big business does big business, a lot of heavy things. That's all I really wanted to say is that, the pot banging was deserved. It still is deserved of anyone who works in a hospital or a supermarket or a fireman, whatever.
Oh, the pots banging, thanking the essential workers who showed up to work every day when other people were able to stay home and get served. John, thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, that must have been a part of your experience. And because you talk about taking this job during the pandemic, and while almost everybody else was being encouraged to stay home in 2020, other people were told that they were essential and basically had to go to work. And that included a lot of supermarket workers, right?
Yes, one of the reasons I wrote this book is I don't want us to forget what was revealed about the important jobs in our society during that moment. This phrase that you used, essential workers, was spreading at that time, and the people that could stay home and do their jobs from their laptops were safer. They got to feel more secure, but there was a class of people, obviously healthcare workers, but there were warehouse workers, meat packers, and also retail grocery workers who showed up to the job. And so these are essential jobs that society can't live without, and it doesn't make sense that they are paid so little. I want to just comment on a couple of things that your callers have said that are really important. The woman with the blood vessel, a broken blood vessel in her leg, this was a very
Yes.
common injury, standing all day behind a register. People who have been to Europe and other countries will recognize that grocery cashiers sit in other places in the world because many of them are unionized, and so they've negotiated a more comfortable serving position. But cashiers in the US generally do stand all day long for 8 hours. And the reason I was told when I got the job is that a standing cashier looks more ready to serve. My manager said nobody wants to feel like they're having to rouse a sitting cashier from a chair in order to be served. So it really is a position of servitude, and that I'm standing as a way of showing you that I want to perform good customer service and a way of flattering the customer. The same thing goes with bagging. You mentioned a woman I write about in my book named Irene who struggled with a back injury. That injury was exacerbated because she had to bag groceries for customers. When you go to a supermarket in the US, the cashier will often put your items in the bag. And this opening the bag, putting things in, and moving the bag over time, thousands of times a day for months and years, this creates back pain. Right? And this is also a customer service issue because in the US, we're used to having cashiers bag our groceries for us while they're standing. So I want customers to understand that the customer service is not inherently demeaning. I had a wonderful experience in the store in a lot of ways. Customers could be very kind, could be very generous, they expressed a lot of gratitude to us for working during the pandemic. But there's this structural problem where this idea of customer service and of being kind of flattering the customer and doing all this work for them creates injury. And this is something that we have to deal with as a society. One more thing I want to mention, that the woman who talked about having to add up your purchases, before the age of sort of digital scanners and things like that. This raises another important question. Another important issue is we may think of grocery work as unskilled, as kind of this slur that we hear that cashiers are this is an unskilled job. That is not the case at all. As the woman mentioned, back in the day, she had to actually do the math to add up the items that a customer brought to the check stand. While cashiers don't do that anymore, they have plenty of other skills. One of the themes of the book is how long it took me to learn to use the register. These are complicated machines that require a lot of technical skills that are not necessarily easy to learn. Cashiers have to have lots of communication skills. 100 people are coming through your register a day, and you have to be able to communicate with them. Is this somebody who wants to chat with me about sports and the weather, or is this somebody who's in kind of a bad mood and just wants to be ignored? Customers ask you about where's the applesauce or where are the 9-volt batteries. You have to have extensive knowledge of your store's inventory to be able to do your job well. So one of the reasons I wrote the book, again, the injuries are just deplorable, and also this is a highly skilled work that should be better respected, better paid, and their contribution to our society acknowledged.
And listeners, if you're just joining us, our guest is Ann Larson, a fellow at the Economic Hardship Reporting Project and the author now of Cleanup on Aisle 5, Essential Work, Poverty Wages, and the View from Behind the Supermarket Register. We're getting some really interesting text. One asks, are different supermarket chains different? And some examples that they give. Aldi cashiers are seated. Could you please talk about Trader Joe's? Another text. The employees there seem happy and well paid. So talk about a spectrum, if there's a spectrum that you see here.
There are only about 3 or 4 very large conglomerates that sell most of the groceries we buy in America. We have an incredibly concentrated retail grocery industry. So most stores that you shop in are owned by one of these big 4. So you may think that you are shopping in a different store that's maybe a smaller chain or even a mom and pop, but if you do the research, you will often find that that store is owned by a larger company like Kroger, Costco, and Trader Joe's is actually owned by a giant German conglomerate. It kind of, the marketing of Trader Joe's makes it look a little bit like a boutique store, but that is definitely not the case. It's one of the largest and most profitable corporations in the world. One of the things I talk about in the book is this kind of illusion that when you walk into a store in your neighborhood, you may think it's a neighborhood store, but it's actually, it's actually a large company. And the reason why this is a problem is because this is harmful for both shoppers and workers. Because what it means for shoppers is that the companies can raise prices. We saw this during the pandemic. Prices went up on things like eggs and meat and other goods. And corporations said that they were because of the pandemic, that they were passing along their extra costs, from supply chain problems and all of that. And that seemed kind of like,
I think a lot of on that specific point, I think a lot of people might say, wait, as a shopper, as a consumer, one of the advantages of the chains is that, because they can purchase in such bulk, the prices are lower. And that can be a problem too, because, I don't know, Walmart or whatever that also sells a lot of groceries and can buy at a big discount and therefore sell at lower prices, pushes out local mom and pop grocery stores, but that the big chains can have lower prices because of that scale that they can buy at.
The chains can buy at high volume, and that gives them authority over prices. And if you look historically, when I researched the book, what I found is that concentration of the grocery industry has pushed up prices for consumers. If companies want to raise prices, they can, because as shoppers, we don't have anywhere else to go. The store down the street is owned by the same company, and so they have the same, shelf prices as the other store. So if you look historically, companies want us to think that the bigger they are and the more higher volume that they purchase in, the prices are better for shoppers. But it just has not proved true historically. And I think the pandemic revealed this. Studies after the pandemic from the Roosevelt Institute and other places showed that corporations were gouging shoppers. They were using the pandemic to reap a windfall, and they were taking advantage of the crisis to make a profit. One way you can also tell what was going on is that corporations right now are doing buybacks to shareholders, especially retail companies. During the pandemic, Kroger did one of the largest corporate shareholder buybacks in its history. So they were making huge profits. And what did they do? They didn't raise wages for workers or lower prices for shoppers. They sent the money to their shareholders. And so that's another sign that this just simply isn't true. We actually need to enforce our antitrust laws in this country. We need to break up these giant companies that have so much power over wages and over prices. And that's one of the things that I learned while working in the store.
Here's kind of a pushback text. Listener writes, this is the kind of liberal elite story cosplaying labor that infuriates the working class. My immigrant parents put me to work in their small business, stocking, cashiering, dishwashing, etc. And what I learned is humility. Customers don't see you as a person. So, on the one hand, I think at the end of that text, the person is backing up one of your main points. Customers don't see you as a person. And yet they're criticizing you as having written a liberal elite story that infuriates the working class. I'm curious your reaction.
Well, the person is exactly right that on the job in the supermarket, it can feel very thankless and invisible. I've already mentioned how difficult the work is and how much injury is a factor. But what I would say is there's nothing inherently demeaning about customer service work. I was very proud many times to work in my store, and there were many positive relations between workers and shoppers. I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with humility. What I have a problem with is the low wages that these jobs pay and the physical injury that they make likely. I think, a lot of people that I worked with could not afford health insurance. So we're working in these very difficult physical jobs. And health insurance at my store, I paid $40 a week to be on my company plan. For many of my colleagues, that was simply too much. That's the kind of margins that we're talking about. So people couldn't even go to the doctor when they got sick or became injured. There were very, very few people that could afford to take vacation days. We have what one scholar called a no vacation nation, where people are working in these very difficult jobs for months and years, and they can never take a paid day off. About 1 in 4 U.S. workers can't take a paid day off. So I totally agree with the texter that these jobs are difficult and people don't see you as human, but that isn't a function of customer service inherently. It's a function of the precarity that these workers are laboring under.
Joe in Stanford. Actually, Joe, hang on a second. Because you're talking about this issue of dignity, and spoiler alert, that's the last word in the book, dignity. Gordon in Douglaston, I think, has a first-person story along these lines. Gordon, you're on WNYC. Hi.
Hey, thank you, Brian. You might recall I sang my song Whale Off on the summer solstice a few years ago. Brian, the great Gordie Howe, the NHL superstar, said he sat down every chance he had, which allowed him to play into his 40s in the NHL. So your guest is absolutely right about getting off your feet. But I was in the grocery store, and a very nasty customer was abusing the cashier. And I called the manager over, and I said, you should train your people to say, excuse me, in a loud voice. You're being inappropriate. Let me help you solve your problem, or should I call security? And I was trained that you don't have to take care of every customer.
Meaning you should say, you're a bad person in our store. We're not going to have you back.
No, you're just inappropriate, and let me solve your problem. Or should I call security? It's private property. And should we call security? Why should you abuse this person? Why? It's like people when they call into call centers. They're abused left and right because they're hiding behind the telephone.
Right.
You're being inappropriate. You have a lack of coping skills, and you have a lack of conflict resolution skills.
As a customer, did you feel in the instance that you're talking about, was management supportive of the worker?
They couldn't say one word. They were dumbfounded. They didn't know what they say. They remained silent.
Gordon, thank you very much. I bet that sounds familiar, Anne.
It does. It does. Back to my metaphor of the split screen. There were many wonderful customers, very kind and gracious, and there is plenty. The caller is exactly right. There's plenty of abuse of customer service workers. I think I did some research on this. The instances of researchers call it incivility on the job are going up. Instances where retail workers, service workers complain about customer treatment, it's getting worse, that there are more conflicts in stores. And one of the things that researchers think might be causing this is just general economic inequality in society in general. When people feel like they're working, and I'm talking about people in the store and also shoppers, when people feel like they're working too hard for too little and they're unable to get ahead, they become depressed and frustrated, and people take out their frustrations on somebody who's available. And that is often the person who's checking you out at the supermarket register. That's just a fact that as people become more frustrated and depressed and angry in their own lives, they look for ways to release their frustrations, and sometimes we're the closest thing.
And now here's Joe in Stamford, who says he's in a 4-generation retail grocery family. Joe, you're on WNYC. Hi.
Yeah, well, my father owned 2 food stores. One, you'd call it a bodega. They didn't call it that back then. And a medium-sized supermarket. And I can tell you that in New York City, there's another risk to supermarket employees, especially in smaller stores, which is crime. I mean, I worked at a store on University Avenue in the Bronx, and while I was there were, to my knowledge, there were 2 armed robberies in the place. And the second time, one of the owners was killed. So, yeah, it's a dangerous business, and for a lot of reasons. And I can tell you that it's a low-margin business, too, which really accounts for a lot of this problems with the pay. And I can understand your previous caller's point that, the incivility of the public. My mother was a cashier in one of my father's stores, and she wound up hating the public.
Joe, thank you very much. What would, in response to Joe or all the callers as we start to run out of time, what would dignity look like, to take the last word of your book? Would it, are there policies? Should there be something in the law? What would dignity look like? What would make you think your book accomplished something?
Well, let me first tell you why the word dignity is the last word in the book and why it's an important part of the conclusion is that I'm really inspired by the civil rights movement. And Martin Luther King, just a little while before he died, he was in Memphis, Tennessee, and he was standing in solidarity with striking sanitation workers. And he gave a speech where he talked about these garbage collectors. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, the person that collects garbage is just as important to society as the doctor who cures disease. And to me, this is a really powerful vision for a society where everybody counts. He said in that speech, the famous line from that speech is, all labor has dignity. And I think that is a mission statement for the supermarket as well as our society. Another thing I'll say is that one of the reasons I wrote the book is to challenge this idea that we've heard from the last couple of callers, and I certainly understand where people are coming from when it comes to rude customer service experiences. But I want to challenge this idea that people on opposite sides of the check stand have kind of opposing concerns and that they're like enemies in this war over the grocery store. This is absolutely false. It's just simply not true that we can't have a supermarket where workers earn a living wage, where they're not injured, where they have unions. You mentioned which policies we'd like to see. Grocery workers are not unionized right now, and they really should be. That's one way they can have authority in the workplace. And we really can have supermarkets where workers are well paid, where they're unionized, where they're not being injured on the job, or where if they are, they can get help. And we can have good customer service where shoppers are well treated, where prices are fair, where wages are fair. This is totally possible if we come together and realize that we have these shared concerns and shared interests. And our enemy is corporate power and these corporate these leeches who take and take and take as much as they can from all of us.
If we had more time, I would ask you to tell the story of how self-checkout, which a lot of people consider recent development, goes back to 1916. But people are just going to have to get the book if they want to know that story, because we're out of time. Ann Larson, a fellow with the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, is now the author of Clean Up on Aisle 5, Essential Work, Poverty Wages, and the View from Behind the Supermarket Register. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.
The United States is about to mark its 250th anniversary.
And so, on the Global Story podcast from the BBC, we're telling surprising tales of American influence on the world stage and in ordinary people's lives all across the globe.
We have this ability to export our story, and a lot of people have bought it.
I feel like the American dream is alive but not well.
From the BBC, it's the United States at 250.
Listen wherever you get your podcasts or find us on YouTube.